All right, we are broadcasting to attendees and folks should be coming on in.
Okay, Lee, if you could please send everything to Alex's phone. Hopefully they'll be able to join us that way by phone. And I see people are starting to join us in the Zoom room here. So thank you very much. I'm really excited about tonight's forum here on Zoom. And so with that, I'm just going to get started. I have a little bit of introductory remarks to talk about who we are and why we're here. And then I'll introduce everybody, and then we'll just kind of plunge in as people are joining us. So welcome again to Fighting Back Lessons from AIDS for COVID-19, hosted by the LGBT Historical Society. My name is Terry Beswick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Society, and I'll be moderating tonight's discussion. This event is being recorded and will be posted to our website. Many people will be watching the live stream on Facebook, and I welcome all of you as well. If you are watching with us on Zoom, we welcome your active participation in the forum. Please post any comments in the chat. You just hover down at the bottom there and click on chat, or on the Q&A function if you have a question that you want to ask. And also for the panelists, in the chat function, if there's a resource or link that you want to share with people, or even a thought, you can click on a chat just to go to me or Lee in the background, or to the other panelists, or to everybody. Just put all attendees and panelists. And in the interest of transparency, I just try to post to everybody so they can see what's going on. So with that, I want to say that the LGBT Historical Society, or the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Historical Society, was founded in 1985. We are recognized internationally as a leader in the field of LGBTQ public history. Our mission is to collect, preserve, exhibit, and make accessible to the public materials and knowledge to support and promote understanding of LGBTQ history, culture, and arts in all their diversity. And our operations are centered around two sites: the LGBT Historical Society Museum, located since 2011 in the heart of San Francisco's Castro neighborhood. There goes my dog, I'm sorry. And the Dr. John P. DiCecco Archives and Research Center, open to researchers in the Mid-Market District. And although our physical locations are expected to remain closed for a little while longer due to the COVID pandemic, please check out our Pride Month webpage, which includes a wide array of exhibitions, events, and archival resources at glbthistory.org. And while you're there, shameless plug, please consider becoming a member. We're running a special for Pride Month, which runs through Tuesday. So through the end of June, you can get an annual membership with some cool perks for just $35 or $20 for low income. So take pride in your history. Our history connects us, even when we're apart. Oh, okay, so now that that's out of the way, why are we here? Fighting back lessons from AIDS to COVID. So as with HIV and AIDS in the LGBTQ and other communities, the COVID-19 pandemic has upended the daily life, culture, and economies of the entire world's population. And as with HIV/AIDS, the death toll continues to mount, while we have been faced with a federal government that has been tragically slow to respond. And as with HIV/AIDS, we not only struggle to survive COVID-19, we learn to thrive within the pandemic and imagine the world we want to create after COVID-19. So with the Fighting Back series, we hope that people will be inspired to find ways to transform their possible feelings of anxiety, despair, or anger into action, and to find models for building community and solidarity in the midst of the pandemic. So tonight, our Fighting Back is dealing specifically with direct action, marching and parading, one of my favorite subjects, and I think of our panelists as well. So direct action, marching, and taking to the streets have long been tactics used by the LGBTQ community to promote equality. And these methods were critical for drawing attention to the AIDS crisis and affecting change in public policy. But the epidemiology of the COVID-19 pandemic mandates social separation, not physical gathering. This evening, we will discuss the history of direct action, marches and parades for advancing social justice, the fight against AIDS, and discuss how these strategies are being adapted and deployed during the coronavirus pandemic. And actually, we wrote this description before we started seeing a whole heck of a lot of street action happening. So just a reference on that. So our Fighting Back series. Tonight, we're going to dig into these questions in just a moment. Before we do, I want to introduce our three panelists. We may be joined by a fourth panelist as well. And if they do join us, I'll introduce them when they come in. So to begin with, welcome Christine Dadesky. And Christine is a writer, journalist, parent, and long-term white activist who believes all Americans should be protesting Trump, supporting Black and brown-led anti-racism protests. She has been participating in Black Lives Matter protests in New Orleans, a new second home. She recently launched the online Facebook global group, ACT UP, Fight COVID-19, which has 3,700 members and works to foster informed exchanges and proactive strategies for action around the pandemic. Many members are long-time veteran ACT UP members. Before that, she founded the online Bay Area Queer Anti-Fascist Network, and in the 1990s, she co-founded the Lesbian Avengers and was an early member of ACT UP in New York. She's the author of 4 books. We had an event on Lesbian Avengers a couple years ago. We should do that again. That was fun. Emily Hobson is a longtime activist and a historian of queer radicalism and its intersections with anti-racism, anti-imperialism, and prison abolition. She is the author of the Bay Area History, Lavender and Red, Liberation and Solidarity, and the Gay and Lesbian Left. And I'm still kicking myself for not giving you an interview while you were doing that. And co-editor of the forthcoming movement anthology, Remaking Radicalism, a grassroots documentary history of the United States, 1973 to 2001. Her current research addresses the history of HIV/AIDS activism in prison and incarcerated people. She is a professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, and active in organizing for racial justice and against white nationalism. Welcome, Emily. So hopefully we'll have Alex Yuan join us, but we've got Crystal Mason. Crystal is an activist, artist, mediator, and managing director of Queer Rebels Productions, who is working hard to lift up the voices of queer, trans, people of color, and centering our dreams, hopes, and desires. Crystal, it's an honor to have you here tonight. And yes, I'm going to add my pronouns. I failed to do that. Let's see. Before we begin, I just want to make a note and say that in the last several weeks, since the murder of George Floyd in particular, but other victims of police brutality, we have incorporated the justice movement issues that are coming up, and in particular addressing anti-racism and defeating white supremacy in these forums. And I want to welcome everyone to shift to that entirely and abandon our construct of talking about lessons from AIDS for COVID. I see them as connected, and I think all the panelists that we've had in the last couple of months do see them as connected. And so there's an opportunity here to draw those connections, I think, for people. So with that, I was hoping we could just, we have a small panel tonight, which is wonderful. I think the last few ones I've had, I had like 5 or 6 people, and it's always felt like an hour and a half has gone by too fast. But to begin with, I wanted to give each of you time, and as much time really as you would like, to talk about your work. And particularly as it relates to AIDS, COVID, LGBTQ rights, fighting COVID. And from there, we'll go into talking specifically about direct action, and you're welcome to address those as well. So who would like to get us started? Can I get a volunteer? Just talk about yourself. I mean,
I'll volunteer.
Thanks, Crystal.
Yeah, no problem. I guess I would say that, I started out in activism, smaller things before, but the biggest thing I ever did really in those days was to join ACT UP and to join in the fight against HIV and AIDS, but more so against the government's response to HIV and AIDS, truth to tell. And I also spent time working at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation as well. And then I got a shift came from me. I actually started a women's performance organization in San Francisco called Lunacy with Miriam Kronberg. And it's a shift that sort of like took over. I sort of like kind of went away from like direct action sort of stuff and more into, as I said in my bio, lifting up the voices of QT-POC folks. Because one of the things I did learn from ACT UP and being an activist is the importance of marginalized groups of telling their own stories and representing themselves. And so that's been pretty much my pursuit these last years, is like really creating space for Black people and other people of color to tell their stories and to be seen in the world.
Great. Thanks, and we're definitely going to circle back to some more of that, I hope. And Christine, would you like to talk a little bit about your work?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for the invitation. Give a shout out to everyone who's been protesting. And I do hope that at the end of our program, we'll increase, like right away for our program, maybe cut the last 10 minutes already of what we have to say and invite particularly brown and Black activists who may be listening in to share what they think about this and what agendas they would like to see pursued. I always tell people that I feel like I'm a default activist. You had to kind of pull me pushing and screaming to become an activist. I was not a person who was raised to be political. I was raised to think that the left were all losers. So my journey has been one of becoming an activist, becoming educated to be an activist. And I really began, I think, from having a father who was born in Haiti and being from a family that really was a member of the ruling elite in a country where there was this extreme dictatorship. So very early on, I was identified as being linked to that white supremacy politic. And it was something that shaped me and has, I think, always influenced my recognition that while I am given privilege, that privilege is associated with oppression. And if I basically need to take a position, a very public position early on, that that with white skin and white positioning in any society, you have to take a position. Your privilege means something, but it means you have to take action. And I think I was aware of that early on. Before ACT UP and the Lesbian Adventures in the 90s, I was a part of early peace movement work, Women's Pentagon Action, and particularly the Seneca Women's Peace Camp, where I went as a very young person coming out. And I was educated by women who had been in the civil rights movement, white women who were very strong anti-racist activists, African-American women, Native women. And what I think happened for me was that the actions that we did, which were daily actions of direct action, of getting arrested, were accompanied by educational work and workshops and conversations every day that focused us on why were we there, what were the issues, what were we trying to accomplish. So for me, becoming an activist was very much informed first by a self-education that doesn't stop. And today, I think I speak for myself, and certainly I think I speak for a lot of my peers. Even if we've been doing work and decolonizing work and anti-racist work for a very long time, we know how much we have to do right now to completely continue to educate ourselves and pay attention to the amount of decolonizing that has to happen in our own lives, in our own communities. And so we really need to listen and be educated. I think a lot of us are doing that because while we may think we know issues, really, I think I'll speak for a lot of people that I know. Mostly, I'm keeping my mouth shut, except at protests, and I'm listening. And I'm paying attention to what other people need to say, creating that space, as you say. So I think that's one big lesson. And it was true in the 90s, it was true in the 80s, it's still true now. That as white activists, we have a lot to say and do, but really we need to also make space and listen.
Thank you. Thank you, and Christine. And Emily, I'd like to hear little bit about your work.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be part of this discussion. And I think that, you know, my own coming into radical politics was pretty similar actually to some of what Anne-Christine spoke about, except that I'm of a younger generation.
No.
I grew up in Southern California and graduated high school in 1993. So I was kind of coming to political consciousness with a kind of awareness of the AIDS Direct Action movement and of the Central American Solidarity movement, and with some really kind of, thanks in part to my parents, some awareness of movement history before that, but didn't really find my own way in until more kind of in my college years in the mid-90s. And in particular, actually, some of the grassroots organizing work to fight the right in California, and to fight especially kind of the right as it was mobilizing at the ballot box. So some of the first community organizing work I did was through the fights against Proposition 187 and Proposition 209 and other state ballot initiatives, you know, to attack immigrant rights, to attack affirmative action, and so forth. And then from there, I continued in community organizing work, in particular around issues of racial justice in public schools and organizing with youth in districts across the state. And then as kind of things went on, I also really, I had this like long time passion for movement history as a part of organizing, which sent me into graduate school and becoming a historian. And my relationship to AIDS history in particular is that my first book is a history of the queer left, in particular in the Bay Area, really kind of from the gay liberation era through the early 1990s. And so the last chapter and a half of the book look at AIDS direct action organizing and how it grew out of and was influenced by preceding movements, in particular Central American Solidarity, anti-nuclear work. And we can also talk about a lot of other influences at that time. So I've always just been very passionate about how it is that a movement can truly be coalitional. And, you know, from my own personal perspective, really call on white folks to invest in racial justice, and call on middle class and affluent folks to invest in anti-capitalism and other kinds of, you know, solid forms of solidarity. And I'm also really passionate in thinking about, you know, how is it that movements can center the leadership of folks who are most affected and kind of most marginalized, you know, within that effort at solidarity.
Okay, so where do we begin? There's so much here. I actually feel like Emily, just as, and actually everyone, just, it would be really good for us to just segue into talking about the connections between different social justice movements, and in particular around AIDS. And Emily, you wrote a lot about this, especially focusing, as you said, on the Bay Area. But I mean, prior to AIDS, of course, we had a burgeoning, I guess we called it gay rights movement then. And you know, prior to that, of course, there was women's movement and civil rights movement more broadly. And then there were environmental justice movements, anti-nuclear that you referred to. But, you know, were those strands and threads really part of the formation? And I see you've got a photo behind you, and I'm trying to recognize people behind you actually in that AIDS Action Pledge photo. But and I see, yeah, there's a central anti-intervention in Central America, probably banner up there. So yeah, maybe you could just talk about like how did those different threads sort of feed into that movement that started at different places at the same time around the country.
Right. So, you know, it's to a degree, I think the movement threads that showed up in particular in ACT UP depended on the city and the kind of particular history. But in the Bay Area, you know, Central American solidarity, direct action had been particularly strong. This photograph behind me is a photograph by Rick Gerharter from a march through the Castro on March, I just looked it up, I don't know this off the top of my head, but March 18th of 1988. And it was one of a week really of actions, a week and a half of actions that were prompted by President Reagan basically sent US troops to the Honduras border with a kind of threat to, you know, possibly invade Nicaragua, right, at this sort of a very tense moment, right, in US intervention in Central America and in particular in Nicaragua. And the anti-intervention movement around the US responded very quickly, and in particular in San Francisco, as I said, there were about a week and a half of sustained protests, and the mobilization of troops was pulled back and the kind of threatened invasion didn't occur. But by this point in March of '88, the AIDS Action Pledge, which preceded ACT UP San Francisco, had already formed and had become fairly active, and it played a really important role in the week and a half of protests against intervention and really kind of brought together anti-intervention and queer and AIDS politics in that moment. And the AIDS Action Pledge had also been inspired by the Pledge of Resistance, which was a Central American solidarity organization, which basically people signed a pledge to commit civil disobedience if the US escalated military intervention. And so the AIDS Action Pledge was modeled on that very directly, like I will take civil disobedience to confront the AIDS crisis. And it was also informed by the Pledge of Resistance in terms of some individual leadership and knowledge of how to, you know, mobilize protest and how to engage in direct action. So I threw up this picture just as one of those examples of some of the continuities that come together. And like I said, I think it varies a little bit by city, right? It's a lot about kind of what, you know, like in New York, I think that some of the really strong connections that developed around ACT UP included reproductive rights activism. I think there was more influence out of the anti-apartheid movement on the East Coast in particular and in DC. You know, a bit more connection to like housing activism in Chicago. And, you know, so different kinds of connections in different kinds of places. But I think that, you know, in general, there are so many of us who, you know, we might get involved in a particular issue, but we really do begin to develop a kind of understanding of all these systemic problems being interconnected, right? And that we have to confront them together. And I think that's one of those things that sends people from kind of movement to movement.
Yeah, I think I know that Crystal and Christine. Hi, Alex. How are you? Before we go on, I just want to flip to the correct page in my notes here and introduce you. It's so great to see you, and I'm glad that you're able to join us here. So for everyone, this is Alex Yuen. Alex is an advocate for justice and equality, fighting for their rights and the rights of others and speaking truth to power. Alex was the 2017 San Francisco Pride Parade Grand Marshal and is one of the founders of the San Francisco LGBTQ Center, My Name Is Coalition, and the Committee for Queer Justice. They believe community events are important and founded SF Pride's Nectar/Women's Stage, the Unleashed Dance Party for Women, the Mama's Boys, a live vocals hip hop drag king troupe, and Kingdom, philanthropic drag king house. Alex has won multiple community awards for their activism and was named a sainthood by the Sisters for Perpetual, I didn't know that, by the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I'd forgotten that. So yeah, welcome, Alex. You know, before we go on, you know, we've kind of gone around the room, and I'm sorry you missed it, but everybody just spoke briefly about their work as it relates to activism, and in particular focusing on AIDS, COVID, LGBTQ, anti-racism, anything you want to talk about. Can you just talk to us a little bit beyond your bio, and what your work and your focus has been on. Oh, you got to unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And thank you everyone for allowing me to be a little bit delayed. We are still working. And so I had a work emergency and here I am.
Thank you.
To answer your question, Terry, there's been a lot of things that I've been able to do under the COVID shield, in a sense, right? Because we are virtual, we can help anywhere, any way that we can. And so some of the ways that I've been helping has been different campaigns in other cities and states, doing phone banks and doing text banks, et cetera. I've been working on, and I'm sure you've heard of it, Terry, but we've been working on the People's March that is going to happen this Sunday. And we are taking pride back. We are taking it back to the streets. We're taking it back to our roots. We are going to take it back to the actual route. And we are going to start including all peoples. And in the spirit of Black Lives Matter, we are going to be working with trans and queers of color, BIPOC, and that's who's going to be our front line. We are going to be the speakers. We are going to be the entertainment. We are going to be the ones that are driving this effort. And all of our white allies are going to take a border position and help us with pretty much anything that's going on that day. It's very grassroots. We have a couple thousand people that have confirmed already. We have probably more than 10 groups that have bringing their coalition, and they're going to be joining us. But this is just a start of bringing it back to the people. We are tired of it being so corporate. We are tired of it being so police driven. We don't want any police. We don't want any corporations, because you're finding out the truth right now about the corporations that we're using, or that the Pride agency is partnering with. You're finding out very true about their policies now during the Black Lives Matter movement. You're seeing that a lot of them now are starting to have diversity inclusion groups. Where were they, right? And so if we are taking money from corporations that don't have our voice, then that means we are just as bad as they are. And so what we're trying to do is just bring it back to the People's Pride, or the People's March and protest. And we want Black and brown people to stand tall, because we've been missing from San Francisco Pride for many, 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 many years. I mean, we can't even count how many years that we have not had a presence. And it just seems like they don't care. And so we are bringing it back, and we might as well use the momentum of what we've been doing for many, many years. And then unfortunately, what has happened to Mr. Floyd, that, you know, he's the black man that's going to save the world. That's how I look at it. There's a lot of changes that are happening because of him giving up his life for many. So those are some of the big things I'm working on right now. And that's this Sunday, the 28th. And we're going to gather at 10:30 at Polk and Jackson, which was the original route. And then we'll go from there, and we'll end up at the Civic Center. Yeah,
that's awesome and amazing, and I think we, you know, let's get back to that. You know, we have about an hour. We're gonna again, for the people that are watching on Zoom, feel free to go ahead and I always saw a note from Randy, my friend Randy Alfred. He corrected me. Yeah, I'm gonna mess up no matter what, but it's like. So he pointed out that at the start of the AIDS epidemic, the terminology was lesbian and gay. And I referred to it as gay rights at that time, the gay rights movement, but it was really lesbian and gay. No bi or trans yet, but that was the situation at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. And that's very interesting. We should put a timeline of all that actually up at the museum when we get back in there. So we've got a great mix of people here. You know, we were just sort of starting to get into the history of the origins of the AIDS activist movement, and how there were a lot of veteran activists or even younger activists that were working in other social justice movements that brought those experiences. And Emily was also saying you know, and if I may paraphrase you, but I think that there were people that were radicalized as a result of their AIDS activism, and became gained greater awareness of other social justice issues as a result of their AIDS activism. And I'm thinking in particular about the gay boys, you know, the gay and the gay white boys in particular, that like myself, who were part of ACT UP in those early days, and the AIDS Action Pledge and Citizens for Medical Justice before that, where, you know, we were, you know, there was some dabbling in electoral politics for me personally. You know, people may have dabbled in stuff in school or whatever, but we're really like got involved as a result of AIDS. But then, you know, the thing is about HIV is that, you know, it impacted all these communities just as COVID does, that were already suffering from inadequate access to services, income inequality, people of color, and in particular. So we learned about these things, and we began to get involved in those as well. The other side of that, though, maybe there's another side of that. And Christine, did you have a comment on that?
Yes, I did. I think what I wanted to do for myself, because I'm thinking, well, I'm on this panel, how can I be of use here? Mm-hmm. And I think what I wanted to talk about is, you know, what actually happened for us in those movements that we can apply now. Yeah. And so I think that one of the lessons from the 90s and the AIDS epidemic, and I think this is true for what you're saying, Terry, is that a lot of people got involved, as they always do, because it's personal to them. People are self-invested. That's why they're willing to take an extra risk, because they feel directly threatened in a deeper way. I think a lot of white activists right now look in the mirror and see themselves, they see the racism, they see their silence, they see their inaction, and say, I can't tolerate this. I have to be in the streets. I need to figure out my role in this particular movement that is Black and brown led. That's because it's very personal. It's become personal for a lot of Americans. I think in a way it wasn't and always should have been, but it is now. I think the other thing for me is that, yes, as you know, as Lee's already said, is that people came from other movements. And in New York, we had incredible leadership from people that had been in the reproductive rights movement and the abortion rights movement. But it was also broadly that as a group, there was really a focus on a rights-driven agenda, on looking at it and saying, what are the rights issues? What is the commons here that every person with HIV or was impacted is entitled to? And so it was beginning with very concrete objectives, what any action, any ideas to say, what is it that we're trying to seek in doing this action? What is it that needs to happen? And often I think it was, even though the conversations in the rooms could be very theoretical and there was a lot of analysis, I think that the ACT UP group, in comparison to me with a lot of earlier lesbian feminism and consciousness raising and stuff, was to say, we have to at some point move from analysis to action. Mm-hmm. With this analysis, what is the action that we need to be taking? What are the things that need to happen this week that we can't live without? What are the things that need to happen in a week? What's happening in our community? Who's not at the table? And grounding these kind of political conversations in concrete action. But I think the other piece of it, and the reason that ACT UP for me was a successful movement, is because it didn't try to tell people what to do. A lot of other groups that I've been in and watched who have not succeeded, who have not built the sustainability, they kind of chose agendas that might have emerged from the top down. And I think that where BLM now, Black Lives Matter, and other groups are succeeding is they're creating a space for people from the community to say, this is what's important to me. This is my story. This is what's happening. And as a result of what's happening here now, this is what we want to see happen. And from there, the agenda gets built. And so I think that it's critical now for us, as we're participating in coalition-led movements and things, is to say, what are the agendas that are the priority for the communities that are the most vulnerable? Mm-hmm. And we have to begin there and say, what is my position in relation to that? I just want to share that. For me, it was, for example, I came from a background of working in Haiti. My background was global. A lot of Haitians didn't come to ACT UP meetings. Why? Because some were not documented, because they couldn't afford to get arrested. And so there's a reason why ACT UP actions in, the center of Manhattan weren't necessarily going to have the same participation of Haitians that an action at the Brooklyn Navy Yard was going to be, where you had a lot of undocumented Haitians who were living with HIV.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, privilege, analysis, but action.
Yeah,
Grounded.
yeah, that's a really good framing from both of you, and it's, you know, we're going to be jumping back and forth between talking about the 80s and 90s and talking about today, and so that's just that's the challenge for us right now. But Crystal, I'm wondering, can you? I'm just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about, you know, how the targets were chosen and the priorities and strategies on those weekly urgent meetings in your experience with ACT UP, and how that worked within the differing priorities, or whatever you want to talk about.
Well, I mean, I think for me, I feel like I need to backtrack a little bit. Because, like, you know, I don't know exactly how it was in New York. I mean, though we had, you know, some cross-pollination, of course, between New York and San Francisco. But I was also thinking a little bit, I looked at some of the questions you had asked, and I was thinking a little bit about the connections and, like, where we are today, and part of the reason, and, like, you know, reasons why we are where we are today. And I think of ACT UP as a movement that has some successes. And I want to be, like, clear about that, because I think that while ACT UP had some successes, a lot of people were left behind. I mean, HIV and AIDS is still exploding in the African American community. And you know, one of the big things that was that we were fighting for in ACT UP was universal health care. And my feeling is that partly what happened is that once cures start to come online, and more of the white men who were a lot of part of ACT UP were getting those cures, a lot of energy went out of the movement. And then also Clinton got elected, which also took a lot of energy out of the movement. And this is why I like to say, like I said, that I feel like ACT UP had some great successes, but I don't know if I would say it was necessarily a successful movement. And I would say that about a lot of movements, truth to tell, because I feel like if we had had these successful movements, we wouldn't be where we are today. And one of the things that I feel like has happened in the past, and also happened in San Francisco to a certain extent, and one of the things that has to stop happening is literally the centering of whiteness. Because one of the things I remember, getting back to your original question, is being in those rooms and having, like, not just theoretical arguments, but like some knockdown drag outs. You know, I remember having someone say to me, like, you know, people in our community are dying. And I'm like, well, people in my community have been dying. And so I think, like, for me, one of the bigger connections I'm feeling here is that, at least for the last several years, the term "we have to center the most marginalized" has been put out a lot. And I'm wondering, like, also what that can look like, because my feeling is like the things that sort of ACT UP and other movements have failed at is changing the material conditions of those most marginalized people. And so I think we have to look at that as well. And like I said, I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of good intentions, but our inability to stop centering whiteness. I mean, in a large extent, one of the things that ACT UP did that was really good was, like, kind of like not to be too concerned with respectability sort of politics, which was also a big difference in the gay and lesbian movement. When you think about the beginning with the Daughters of Bilitis and I forget the name of the guy organization, but their whole thing of wearing suits and looking professional. And, like, you know, that ran a long time in gay and lesbian, like, you know, even like, you know, through like, you know, the wild 60s and stuff, there was still a lot of concern about respectability politics. And that was one of the things I found really great about being part of ACT UP, is that part was thrown out the door. But the needs of white people, I feel like still like took center stage a lot of times. And I don't mean like individual white people, but like who had money, who had the time to come to the meetings and do all the things, right? Like I said, like once treatment started to come out, you know, as I said before, I used to work at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. And I know a lot of my homeless clients couldn't get those treatments because due to the fact they were homeless, they were non-compliant. And again, you know, most of those were Black and brown folks, even though like obviously some white guys and women also got caught up under that. But again, like I said, I feel like the thread I see like kind of running through is the absolute failure of centering the most marginalized.
Yeah, and I thank you for that, Crystal. And I recall those knockdown dragouts and also the theoretical discussions that were happening. Although I think in San Francisco, I feel like we've done a lot of discussion in hindsight, an analysis in hindsight of those dynamics. I actually just wrote a piece for the Bay Area Reporter that's coming out tomorrow that is specifically calling out the fact that we, as a gay white centered organization, as individuals, that, you know, once we got what we wanted, we moved on.
Mm-hmm.
We moved on, and to be fair, some of us died and some of us burned out, and you know, and then came up again to do other things later. But you know, but the urgency went out, and I think you're right. The Clinton administration also, because they were at least listening, you know, and speaking about the issues, and you know, and right now we've got Trump, you know, and so in some ways, you know, that's really kind of like helping to galvanize this movement that we're experiencing right now, don't you think?
I think it's definitely that. And I also think, to make another point, a lot of the people who came into the activist movement and who identified a need, one of the things that ACT UP did was that there was no way to wait for a federal government when a federal government was criminalizing gay and Black and other bodies. And I think that to some extent is true now. People recognize the federal government is not going to step in. So I think what happened with ACT UP is that there's a huge amount of direct services and services that got created within all communities at that level. And essentially those became the institutions of the HIV movement. And tons of people moved from maybe an initial position of activism into direct service, into policy, into creation, so that you have a lot of spin-off groups that got created. I mean, Treatment Action Group was a group that was essentially very white-led gay male agenda around treatment. And it involved people from ACT UP who went and moved into that realm and were advocating, but they were advocating to some extent for agendas that served very much the political and personal positions they were speaking from. And it was maybe different from what was happening in San Francisco or in LA.
You know, in San Francisco, we had this split, and Crystal and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, but we had a split of ACT UP San Francisco to where we separated off to ACT UP Golden Gate that focused on treatment issues, which was,
my point is there were a lot of victories and a lot of things got created.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of work was spun off. Organizations were formed. People developed careers and changed careers and all that. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. Alex, what are you thinking?
I want to respond, though, before I say anything, to one of our audience members, Lito Sandoval, mentioned that some organizations split off into two organizations. And that's
yeah, that's what I was just referring to. Lita was
Right.
part of that, and I think Lito and Crystal were on the ACT UP San Francisco side of that split. I was more on the ACT UP Golden Gate side, if there were sides, and there were, I guess, there was a lot of overlap as well. But
Well, some of the
Crystal,
things-
what were you going to say?
Oh.
Let me go back to Crystal. I think because
Alice was speaking. I'm done.
okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna sort of segue with what Crystal was saying, because depending on who was leading the meetings and depending on who was in the room, some of us didn't exist. And depending on your age too, you didn't get a voice. And depending on who was leading the meeting or who had all the power of, you know, being able to have off and have time to get minutes together or get the agenda together or get some sort of structure together. Most of the time, my friends and I sort of took what they were doing and moved to the side and, you know, came up with some other ideas that we can participate and feel as though we're participating. But, you know, I was a young pup and didn't get recognized skin color, didn't get recognized gender, didn't get recognized, you know, just having a young voice, you know, we were ignored. And then, you know, how do you want to participate when one or two people think that they have the floor all the time? You know, you don't hear all the voices. And then it gets to be frustrating. You say, I'm out, peace out, and you start doing your own thing. And so we started doing some splinter groups where we knew that we can have some benefits or some value to adding, to helping. We weren't called anything. We just did our jobs. We just did work. We showed up when we were supposed to show up. We did things when we were supposed to do things. We were just there.
I would just say that, like, I want to be clear, because, like I said, I definitely know that ACT UP has some successes. You know, that's for sure. And I know that we in ACT UP San Francisco, in any case, I know we also, you know, try to do work with, like, marginalized people, like people with AIDS in jails and prisons, for instance, and sex workers and people like that. But I think, like, when I go back to it, like I said, it just seems to me that, again, like, I'm just wondering, like, what would it have looked like if we had actually centered the most marginalized? Where would we be even with COVID today, right? What would have happened if ACT UP had kept pushing for universal health care? You know, or like, and I think, like, what happened with Clinton, I feel like, is like, yeah, he did talk and he listened, but, you know, he still left the Haitians on that ship right after he said that if he got elected, he would, like, you know, do something about that. And I feel like, and I'm going to say we here, because I felt it too, of the fatigue, right, of the years of Reagan, the years of Bush. And it was, like, hard to, like, then get people again excited, right? Because Clinton was on our side. And I think this is something that we have to be careful about at this very moment, of, like, letting, like, organized politics, like, kill this movement and kill the momentum, and to have people settle for what looks like justice rather than demanding real justice. And I think that's more what I'm talking about. And again, that's not the fault of individuals necessarily. This is the state we live in. This is the world we live in, right? We're sort of like, yeah, from, like, the city council to the White House, we center white thought, white fears, and you know, and by extension, like, who has, like, resources and who doesn't, and things of this sort. And I feel like, for myself, I'm just saying that this is, for me, an important lesson to learn from this moment. But also, I would have to say that I feel like this is also a moment where white people need to know that they're not doing whatever you're doing to move this moment forward. You're not doing it for Black people. You're doing it for yourself. Because, as I've been known to say, white supremacy is going to get us all killed. And I feel like that's, like, what people are starting to wake up to, some now.
Mhm.
And I feel like even though people in ACT UP had been from all these movements and stuff, and there was like some understanding of that, I
Mhm.
don't think it was ever really clear, even in ACT UP,
Right.
is that, you know, we all got to make it, or we're not gonna make it. Or the fact that when a Black trans, like, ex-prisoner can actually, like, live and thrive, then we'll all live and thrive. And I feel like, you know, we didn't follow through maybe with that idea. And I'm not, and ACT UP is not the only organization, you know. I mean, a lot of the women's movement didn't follow up on that, right? I mean, and a lot of the movements always had like problems with racism and stuff because we live in America, you know. I mean, again, not about individual people, but about the systems we live in.
Yeah,
Can
and
I-
you know,
can-
yeah, I
say
just
something
want to go ahead, Anne, Christine.
I was going to say, Crystal, I think one thing that I observe is that there's often expectations for groups without really an appreciation of who is in the room, who has come into the room, and what is their agenda? What are they there to do? And I'll speak for the Lesbian Avengers as an example. The Lesbian Avengers was fairly a fair amount of some experienced older white and some Latina and a few African American lesbians who had been in the AIDS movement, other movements, and were seeing a need for greater lesbian visibility and exclusion of lesbian issues.
Yeah.
But the women who got attracted to it were largely younger, white, college-educated women. And when the work came to try to figure out what were those women willing to do, what they wanted to do was, what was important to them was to celebrate their sexuality publicly, to talk about a shifting sexuality for them, much more than maybe taking actions by doing solidarity work with Bronx Lesbians United in the Bronx, or with Latino women who were maybe wanting to talk about, you know, hate talk on the radio. So I think it's critical to know who's in the room, and then to look at institutionally and say, what outreach are you doing so that that room shifts? And I think right now that's so important in all these cities, to look and say, who's speaking for the movement, who's not at the table. And so if we, you know, so that we have realistic expectations of what people are going to do. I had no expectation that most of the people in ACT UP were ever going to be fighting for universal health care. The women and other people in the rooms in New York fought tooth and nail for that. It was ugly, very ugly. To try to get people to go to a protest of Haitian refugees was not easy. This was fighting.
Yeah, that's breaking it down.
Yeah, it wasn't their fight. They weren't gonna go.
Yeah. I'm Emily. I'm wanting to bring you back in here, and I'm trying to think of some really brainy question that I can throw at you to put it in a historical context for us and tie a bow on it. But that's not going to happen. So I'm going to just like ask about, I'm thinking, you know, we're talking a lot about AIDS and ACT UP, but I'm also just thinking about, you know, I mean, ACT UP functioned as a component of the larger society and culture, obviously, and we've all alluded to that. And in particular, Crystal. And I think that in particular, it functioned as a part of or overlapping with the LGBTQ rights movement, you know, and I'm just thinking about, you know, just just this month, we had the Supreme Court ruling, you know, outlining, you know, firing LGBT or at least gay and transgender people from their jobs for who they are, for their sexuality or identity, and you know, so. And I'm wondering about like how that sort of, those kind of advances for LGBT rights, is that going to take the steam out of LGBT involvement in the fight for racial justice that we're experiencing right now? And in particular, the leadership of the, or you know, or how do you see this evolving? Because, you know, it's about, I mean, the LGBTQ community writ large is as diverse as the rest of the population. And it is not a functioning body, you know, it is a lot of different component parts. But but I'm just thinking about the leadership and the fight for queer rights as we start to win those battles. Are we going to move on and forget about the queer people of color, the queer trans people of color in those social justice movements? So, you know, I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like large national organizations, they've already moved on. They did that years ago. You know, you don't see large national organizations out there even making particularly strong statements around around the kind of current uprising, or supporting Black Lives Matter, or supporting or standing with the movement for Black Lives, you know, week of action. Like, you see actually those organizations, BLM and Movement for Black Lives, having, you know, really bringing trans and queer issues into the broader framework of Black Lives Matter. And I think it's also worth pointing out, right, that the three women who really created the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and then the organization, of the three of them, two are queer identified, right? So this is already a heavily queer and trans led movement. Not exclusively, certainly, but heavily so. And I think that, you know, you're right, we don't have one LGBTQ community at this point. We have many. And I think, you know, of folks who are in the streets, and that there's a good awareness and a good integration in many ways of LGBTQ politics, and a fair amount of visibility. I think it could always be better, and brought in more strongly and kind of more explicitly named. And I think that the reclaiming of pride is a really important kind of avenue into that, through kind of some of the more like officially recognized events and organizations. But you know, really since the sort of moment that Crystal mentioned, of the kind of founding of the Daughters of Bilitis, or of Mattachine, kind of the homophile era, since that moment, since really kind of the beginning, there's been a split between the kind of most visible national kind of rights focused, relatively more respectable organizations, more legal organizations, and the like lived experience day to day, and the kind of fighting back against police in particular, or fighting back against other kinds of state violence. And I think that, I mean, a connection that I was also thinking about as other folks were talking was that this, you know, it is really important for people's self-interest to be what brings them into the room, right? And so that means for white people too. And one of the patterns that I've definitely noticed in kind of queer history is that, you know, when there are attacks kind of from the right, white queer people sort of recognize a common enemy and join in to coalitions. But there's two risks to that. One, there's like a victory made, and so then people back away because they're no longer as concerned or as invested. And then the other risk is that sometimes those white folks start to try to forget that they're white. Like, they kind of come into the room and you know, I mean, I recognize this as a like draw, as a pull, as a desire, you know, for folks who are like, oh yeah, the right, you know, these white supremacists see me as a race traitor, so maybe I am, like, maybe I can kind of give that up for a second. And
So they forget their privilege, basically.
They forget their privilege, they forget the sort of, and you know, this even gets absorbed into more kind of other settings where, like in my own university, when people talk about diversity, they want to talk about anything. Like, so for many of us, when we you know, use diversity and inclusion, we're actually talking about racial and ethnic diversity and recognition and power and injustice. And we use other words to talk about like queer issues on campus or women faculty, but the administration wants to say diversity and inclusion to cover all manner of sins, right? And by doing so, they can look at a group, you know, and say, well, look, we have all these white gay people in leadership at the university, which is true in my university. Therefore, we have diversity in leadership, right? And some of those same folks are actually, you know, obstacles to other kinds of change. So I think that's another dynamic I would name, right? Is the ways that that solidarity, you know, it may begin in this kind of really radical way, but it can be co-opted and usurped.
Right. So, you know, and we have like a half an hour left, and I just want to like interject to say, for those who are watching, and a lot of people are going to just watch this on Facebook, and I'm not monitoring Facebook comments, and I apologize for that. Lee, if you want to like copy paste any comments that are coming in on Facebook and put it in here, then I'm happy to go to those. But other people will be watching the recording. And that's fine. Things are changing pretty quickly, I want to say, and I want to be sure to like get it into a little bit of prognostication about where we're going and, you know, what's happening in this moment, but also in the future. But before I do that, I just want to like circle back to something that everybody alluded to, which is kind of like the danger of incrementalism, the danger of moderation, the danger of being co-opted, the danger of neoliberalism. And, you know, Alex, I think of you as, you know, when I think radical, if I look up radical in the dictionary, it's probably going to be a picture of you there somewhere. But also you come to the table and you talk with people and you know, and you get wins, right? So, you know, so what's the, you know, right now we have a movement that's growing. There are some specific demands that are being defined. And, you know, people are, national organizations and queer organizations are signing on to letters saying, yeah, you know, against, you know, they're saying the right things. And we're in a presidential campaign. We're hearing campaigns are going to be saying the right things. There's an entropy, I think, that sets in, you know, that will maybe slow down that momentum based on our history. How do we keep it going? How do we keep our you know? And I think I'm just maybe making some assumptions about the things that we all agree on here, that we would like to see. You know, what that looks like specifically. You know, we probably don't have time to get into, but if we're talking about, you know, fighting white supremacy, establishing greater racial equity, you know, ending police brutality, and then we can get into talking about AIDS and COVID too, and just healthcare for all, and so on. But, you know, how do we keep that momentum going? Can you speak to that? I mean, you're taking to the streets on Sunday. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm going to just go back a little bit, Terry, before I answer your question. One of the things that I'm seeing is that because people were able, and it's a little bit of what everyone was saying, people were able to see things straight on that affected their humanity. And that's where we got most to get out in the street and fight during a pandemic, because what we saw was the tipping point. And we, as POC, BIPOC, have been living this nightmare. You know, if you want to go back to our ancestors, 401 years, right? And we've also seen start, stop, a little bit of policy here, a little bit of policy there, and not really the policy of change that we really need, that Crystal was talking about earlier, that Anne Christine talked on. What I'm seeing now, and this is just, you know, like I wish I could transport myself to some other cities just to see really what's happening, but because we're in such a bubble that we're almost preaching to the choir here. But what I'm seeing here is more white people are standing up and using their voices and using their privilege to make a change. That's what I'm seeing right now. I'm seeing white people do their homework and tell other white people, if they didn't do their homework, go and stop asking the BIPOC those questions. Go and do your own research. Go and find this on your own so you are more knowledgeable about our next steps. So what I'm seeing is that there's more of a collaboration of where these policy changes need to happen and where they need to go. And I'm hopeful. Like I'm not going to get too crazy about it, because these turns happen, people get bored, you know, it's not about them anymore. And there's, you know, the question of what do I do next and how do I keep active? But I think the fact that our youth is involved, I think the fact that they took down the president last Saturday, this is what gives me the hope, is that our youth is involved. And I've been speaking at different rallies, and I went to a rally on Friday that I spoke to, which where the average age was probably under 25. There were some babies in the audience that were speaking truth to power. And I asked this one young person how old they were from the mic, and they told me they were 14, right? Another person yelled out 17. You know, some people said, I can't vote yet, but I'm here and I'm going to help make the changes. So this is where, you know, I get the hope, because there's a lot of those there's a lot of them. And they're definitely making the change, and they're looking up to their elders. They're not like shitting on what we've done for the past, you know, years. They're not shitting on us. They're listening, you know, and they're taking the best of what we can give them and expanding it. And that's just so beautiful to me. And that's where I see the hope. I don't want to get discouraged. I will be out there as much as I can, you know, and I hope that others feel the same way. And the only way that we're going to keep this going is if we start making some policy changes that make sense. I mean, we've forced some different changes in policing, but, you know, it should be coming from the federal level. It shouldn't always have to come from the communities. It should be coming from we should have a president that says, that is a great fucking idea. Yes, bring me all the information that I need to make these decisions, to see how we can change this world, because we are looked at as the hotbed. And so when we don't change, some other countries don't change. They look at us. You know, look at the world right now. Look at it. It took one, you know, it took this movement here in the United States for the world to start taking care of their own, you know, people of color and less marginalized. So I have hope. I think the next steps are going to be the most tough, because people are going to get exhausted. Same people are out there. We need a tag team. We need the front line to be able to rest so the next line can step up. And so we just got to figure out ways of how we can do that. And that's what we're trying now. We're just trying to keep people mobilized and keep them energized. So that's my chore. That's our chore right now. I see that Anne Christine wants to jump in here.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Crystal. I was actually going to take this question from an audience person and pass it off to Crystal first, and then I'll come back to you, Anne Christine. So I have someone, an anonymous person, saying and this is in line with what we're talking about, but having the Clinton and Obama era gay complacency in mind, how do we make sure that the wealthy gay contingent fights with us after this cycle of activism fades during the next liberal presidency, assuming that Biden will be there? Crystal, can you address that?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I don't have any like, you know, like extra like insight, but one of the things I would say though is that one is that we have to organize like among ourselves, and I feel like, and then we need to give our money to the organizations that's doing the work we want them to be doing, rather than these national organizations who don't seem to be like concerned with what, you know, with what we're concerned with. I mean, there's one thing, I mean, because money, right? Money is like real, money is king with a lot of these groups trying to organize and whatnot. So, I mean, that's one thing. But I feel like also, yeah, I mean, like you said earlier, it's not like there's one community, right? But unfortunately, the press, mainstream press, you know, usually when they're going to look at, you know, they're talking to like white voices, right? But I think it's like at the end of the day, I think we have to demand a better agenda from these organizations as well, if they're going to get our money and our support. And I think individual white people, I'll say it again, it's been said a million times, but they need to listen to the most marginalized. And so when setting agendas, when like even when looking at political candidates, who like our, you know, the major organizations back, right? And also I think at the end, as I said, I feel like for one, this fight is all of ours. We all have to be in this fight to dismantle white supremacy, or none of us, literally, we're not going to make it. None of us. And this is not, for me, like hyperbole. This is the real deal. And so one of the things we have to do is to keep fighting, right? And to keep fighting with our organizations, with our fave politicians, with our, you know, fave stars and all of that, and have to hold people to account. Because symbolism is easy. And this is what we get a lot of time, it's symbolism. Because I don't care about, like, with, you know, the Human Rights Campaign talking about Black Lives Matter. I don't care about that if you're not, like, doing the work to include, like, Black trans women and other Black people and getting into this fight and putting, like, your resources and stuff behind it. Otherwise, that's just talk. And, you know, and it's just like with any organization, and I don't care if you're like a yogi or a politician, you know, yeah, you know, good words without good works, it ain't shit, right? I mean, so I think this is also, we have to figure out, like, what we need from our organizations and then push them to be what we need, right? And not settle, and not settle because we can get married, right? Because then we have to ask ourselves, I can get married, but what good is that if I can get, like, beat down in the street, right? What good is that what good even is, like, the law that just passed about the civil rights if I can't even get a job, right? So I think we have to, like, think on a larger level, and we can't see a victory for some of our community as a victory for all of our community.
Right.
Yes.
And Christine, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Well, it's basically picking back. I mean, Crystal, I couldn't agree more. And Alex, you were talking about, I think some of the lessons that I see is that we're already seeing this, and people who are in some of the protests in different cities are making this point. There's not a single universal strategy here. Every community is going to have different priorities and a different set of ways in which it needs to organize. I think, though, that sharing the lessons of what is working is critical. And I think that is happening very successfully. I think the internet in that way is our friend. There's a lot of sharing of models and lessons and voices. And I think that that's in every community, sharing that. And in our own communities, you know, I mean, I don't look to the white national institutions to do anything for me, nor did any of our movements ever look to those institutions. They were not serving our agenda. We have to build from our communities. But I think, again, it's to look in our communities and say, who is at the table? And, you know, people always ask me this question forever as an activist, like, well, how do you know where to start when people are not active? You know, how do you know what to do? And my thinking is, if you're looking at a problem and you're trying to help someone, that person you're trying to help, if it's not yourself, they know their problem and they can tell you what they need, and you work from there. And so I think that whether, you know, what's going to work in New Orleans or be a priority for New Orleans, we've got the information here. We just have to actually go and ask the communities that are most impacted and work. And to me, that's like, we have our strength, we have our resources, we have our allies, we have our tools. We got to do the work. And I think that's it. If we work from that place, we get stronger communities, but we have to share all the lessons in our communities. And I think that's where we get more of a sense of the national agenda. And I think that's working very well. I think that's why Black Lives Matter protests have worked so successfully, is that locally leaders have taken a lot of, you know, they've set their agendas, they've talked to their own communities, they brought out the voices, and then they have shared that message elsewhere. And that's why we see people decolonizing across Europe now more, and across the rest of the world, and that's coming back here. So to me, I'm optimistic, but I'm definitely not looking to large national organizations who are not speaking for, they're not representing, they should be, but they're not representing the most affected. Let's have our most affected community speak. We'll have our agenda, and we'll figure out how to get going from there. That's, to me, the way forward.
Okay, great. I think we're hearing a lot of really good stuff, and as will often be the case, we're running out of time. And I just want to get to a couple of comments, but you know, we're going to probably spend the last 6 or 7 minutes going around for people to just offer any final thoughts about this, and as is often the case, we've shifted from the construct of the of this event as it initially conceived a couple of months ago to something completely different, and that's fabulous, and I'm so grateful for that, because I think we're learning a lot that pertains to the issues of AIDS and COVID in particular right now. But when you make your final remarks, also, if people want to shout out to any organizations or causes that need donations, and you can add those to the chat also for people to see, I'm going to welcome you to do that. So I have a question for Emily. What can we learn from coalition building of the past for coalition building of the present and future? What worked and what did not work?
Yeah, so I just put into the chat a link to an article that I co-wrote with Laura McTighe a month and a half ago, I think, that has a lot, it's a piece on Truth Out, that has a lot of links to some current organizations, and it's kind of a shifted approach to coalition that I want to highlight. First, though, I want to kind of preface it with a bit of a response to the question about, kind of some of the larger national organizations or wealthy donors, right? I mean, the resounding call that I have heard in the past few weeks from protests is defund the police and invest in communities and invest in human needs, right? So, that is not, that is a left call, that is a radical call, right? And it is drawing in large numbers of people, I think in part because of the context of the pandemic, in which people see how intense our needs are, and also the context of climate crisis, right? So I think that if there are some of those national organizations that haven't before understood or cared about defunding the police, or if there are wealthy donors who are suddenly realizing yeah, we're all affected by climate crisis, so maybe I need to get on board with this kind of broader radical vision, welcome, right? That's great. But I don't think that we get places by running to those. Historically, movements haven't really kind of pushed for radical change by running to the more moderate, kinds of demands, right? Sometimes they've been able to leverage support from wealthy folks who have those politics, right? But that's a little different than kind of suiting demands to those who already have power. And the kind of other kind of coalition I want to highlight is also not entirely just about direct action. So even though I know that the panel is is sort of trying to think specifically about direct action, there are also many other kinds of organizing that folks have always done. And the article I linked is partly about my new research, which is about the history of HIV prison activism by incarcerated people and in solidarity with incarcerated people. And in context of prisons, direct action is not the safest tactic, right? What we saw in the AIDS movement in prisons in the 80s and 90s was a lot of efforts at peer education, a lot of working with advocacy groups to try to get compassionate release, to try to build coalitions to highlight conditions on the inside. And we're still seeing that now with conditions around incarcerated people and COVID. So some of the organizations I would highlight are in that article, and they include Release Aging People in Prison. And I would just highlight that some of the impacts of the pandemic are so interwoven with our other kinds of crises around incarceration, immigrant detention, right? As well as kind of all of us on the outside, right? Who are also kind of experiencing crisis. So, and from there, I think we kind of also get a lot of great lessons about creative forms of protest that don't have to demand mobilizing in large numbers that might put us at risk, right? So we've seen a lot of car marches and social media storms, and other kinds of efforts, and also working, figuring out how it is that people who are incarcerated are tracking what's going on for them in terms of COVID. So there are a lot of other kinds of coalition, I think, that are also about different kinds of social locations, and not just about we all do one thing, we all have a march, but we're different, right? So that's kind of what I would many different things I'm trying to bring into one last comment, but
Well,
those are some of the things I would highlight.
Yeah, movements, and I think what we have right now is commonly understood to be a movement, and it's recent. It's building on other movements, obviously, but movements are messy, right? And there are no leaders necessarily, or at least nobody that's centrally calling the shots. Oftentimes, and I think there's often a misconception about ACT UP also, to think that we were entirely about committing civil disobedience and getting arrested and doing direct action, but really that was about getting a door open so that we could discuss our demands with somebody in control or in authority, or at least propping open the door for somebody else to get in there. And I think so I'm hopeful that that's kind of what we're seeing more of now. Do you think about that really consciously, Alex, when you go, you and Juanita are organizing this People's March on Sunday? It's about, it's also about, getting media attention. It's about, building a movement. But in terms of getting the demands achieved, is it a transactional thing for you?
Oh, yeah, that's a heavy question. Let me just, I'd love to answer it so straight up, Terry, but I think there's a couple things here. When we get together and protest like this, people get together because then they realize they're not alone. They have a very similar agenda, and now we can all come together. And, as we start the protest, as, everyone was sort of saying, agendas start to change, debates start to happen, the highlights of things start to change, and we start to get some sort of policy or program that there might be one or two things that we all say, okay, no matter where we are in this world, we agree on that. And those are the messages that have to stay consistent. Now, there's some fringe that we know we have to happen and bring in, but they may not be what the focus is in order for us to make that change. And so what happens is we start providing this voice, right? We start providing this essential voice. And when you have the voice of the different groups, BIPOC or other minority groups, depending on what kind of protest it is, you start to get better at that foundation of a change, right? So with those three things, you start getting some wins. Now you start getting people to wake up and say, aha, I can jump in on that because I know something about that. And this is where I'm seeing is happening, is when people start to realize something that they can contribute, that's when you start seeing them there. And when they realize there's something that they can do with their time that's just not showing up and going, well, this was a waste of my time, so therefore I'm staying home next time it's a freaking pandemic and I'm not hearing anything that relates to me, then they stay home. But as long as we start keeping that constructive foundation going, that where people can buy in to these 3 or 4 changes. I mean, it was very similar to what other panelists were saying, in that we have to have something that we can all, move together. It's almost like a brain. It's almost like we're in each other's brains in different countries. When you start seeing things that were popping up in Australia around the Maui and around the Aboriginal, it was so close to what was happening, if not spot on, to what was happening to us for many, many, many years as well. So it's not an isolated thing. And then, once we start to have those wins, then, we can start having that similar thing. And that's where our generations are kicking in. That's when our young people say, aha, there's something that I can hold on and I can run with it and bye-bye, because don't stop me. And I keep going back to the brilliant move that our young people did from around the world that gave that butthead 1 million thought of 1 million people coming to his rally. I thought that was brilliant. I even bought a ticket, right? I thought it was brilliant because he did a freaking drive-by. He drove his plane over the area that was the what is it called, the offshoot or whatever. He drove over it thinking that he would have a moment of glory of all these people below him waving and screaming. There were 7 freaking people. I loved it, you know, and I watched it live when he came over and I loved it. I was laughing my ass off. And that's the kind of things that we need to do is we need to let these politicians know that it's just not your voice that we're going to keep listening to. It's not it. You know, we got to listen to the people and we got to put the right people and the right voices in the room, no matter what it is, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a movement, whatever that is, we got to be in the room. We have to stop people talking for us. That's it. You know, it's like, I'm tired.
Right.
I'm tired of it. I can't.
I mean, representation matters. And I think that was really a lot of the basis of the AIDS activist movement was building on the PWA empowerment movement to recognize that, you know, it's about putting people who have HIV and AIDS at the table to talk about their needs. And, you know, so I think that was very much driving the beginning of that movement. And it definitely pertains. Representation is important. I have a question for you from the audience. Where do I get a Make Racism Wrong Again hat?
Right on. Well, what color? It depends. You know, we're only doing black. I did this red one because I want to take my fucking color back. I love red, and I do not want those people to have that color anymore.
Thank
so I'm
you.
taking it back. But we have black and white ones that are for sale. So if you go, can I give my website?
Yeah, go.
Oh, okay. If you go out to activistgearshop.com, you'll find them there. And if for some reason we're sold out because people have been asking a lot, there's a new shipment that's coming in. If you see 0, don't pay attention to it. What I'll do is go out after this and I'll change it. So give me a half an hour after this and I'll change the numbers. But we have a new shipment coming in this weekend.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Love you. And I'm so grateful to say hi to Ellen for me.
I certainly will.
Let's just go around and get some final thoughts. And I'm really talking about a minute. Maybe Crystal, could you and Christine, Emily, whichever of you would like to tell me what's burning in your mind? What's burning?
I feel like one of the things that's given me a lot of hope is the knowledge that like high school kids organize some of the biggest marches around. And I went to the march that the high school folks at Mission High organized. And also just to hear like their political analysis at this age was like striking and literally brought me to tears and made me feel like quite hopeful for this moment. And I feel like, I think we all have like something to add to that conversation, but I really would also advise people to listen to the young people organizing these marches and stuff. Because I feel like also these young people are feeling the urgency of this moment in ways that maybe some of us are not quite. And so I would say like listen to these people because they these young folks really they're smart and they know and I feel like they know what's at stake here in ways that a lot of people in our age groups don't quite understand even at this point, like what is at stake here. And so that's the thing that's giving me hope. And one other short thing is, also I want to like ask people to please like keep supporting the demonstrators. Don't get caught up in this violence, versus non-violent BS. Don't get caught up in that mess. And listen, that one of the main demands is to defund the police. So I think it's also incumbent on everyone listening, that's right, and everyone who might want to get involved for this to get on this fucking bus. That's right. Yeah. Because this is a major demand, like everywhere, and we need people to get on that bus.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And do you have any suggestions on where people can give or contribute or volunteer or anything? Just off the top.
I have like so many in my head. Is there any way I could like send you a list as later?
Yeah, absolutely. We can post it.
And I have a list too that I can send to Lee, and we can maybe combine all of them.
Yeah, maybe we can post a list that when we post the event to our website or Facebook tomorrow. Yeah. Emily and Christine, I'm sorry, and we're out of time. But I just want to like give you an opportunity if there's somewhere that people can donate to. If you have anything to suggest, like one place.
I'll defer
Here
to
in New
Anne Christine.
Orleans, I would
Go ahead.
say that there's the New Orleans has the Immigrant Rights Coalition. There's a huge problem of detention of people, many families who are being deported by ICE. COVID is a huge issue. I think that we really need to focus the LGBT movement, particularly in right now, around the issues in ICE and detention as well as incarceration. I just want to make one point. Disasters like this run along pre-existing currents of social and economic inequity. We know that. If we do an analysis of inequity that's happening, we know how to find solutions to these problems. I think, you know, I take a rights-based agenda and I focus on inequity. And that to me gives me lots of guidance about where to take actions.
Great, thank you. And Emily.
I will definitely offer some links in that list that you post. But I did mention Release Aging People in Prison, RAP, is doing some really wonderful work to try to pressure, especially in New York State, but also is linked to a number of other organizations. I would also say the Movement for Black Lives, the national network, and Critical Resistance, who's done a tremendous amount of work to really help give people some of the analytical tools around defunding and abolition. And I would also really echo Anne Christine's points about really, I think one of the things I really hope can happen is that is a more strong link to issues of immigrant detention and pushing back against ICE in this moment to, like, as thinking about it as a form of police violence.
That's right. And can I
Everyone.
just say one last thing, Terry?
Yes.
Sunday, we're gathering at the corner of Polk and Jackson. We are taking back the old route. Be there at 10:30, we're gathering, and then we will start at 11 o'clock. Bring color, bring who you are, you know, bring your contingents, but bring fun, because we're just gonna take back the streets and
Yes,
they're gonna know we're there.
Great,
Okay.
and bring your masks.
Right. Yes, please. There's a government, a state ordinance. You have to have a mask on, and that's how the police will fuck with us if you do not have your mask on.
Right. Yeah. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for your time and for your work and your continued advocacy, and the hope that you've shared with all of us here tonight, I think is really inspiring. And I think, you know, we can learn from the past and apply those lessons to the present and the future. And I echo what Anne Christine said about, you know, be smart and analytical and think about, you know, how we can build these bridges of equity, and in particular within the LGBTQ community. I think because we come together around our gender and sexuality differences, but we have all these other all these other communities that we represent. So I think we have a unique opportunity to do this work. And Alex, see you Sunday. The rest of you, I hope to see you around. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
have a good night, everyone. Thanks everyone for joining
Thank
us.
you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Wash your hands.
Yeah.
Yes.